Hello everybody, I'm here to talk a bit about the Four Seasons. Obviously we could spend a very long time talking about the Four Seasons, so we'll split it up into a series of videos and we'll start, as you might expect, with Spring. When Vivaldi published the Opus 8 round about 1725, he dedicated it to Count Wenzel von Morzin, who was a Bohemian nobleman. In the preface to the publication, Vivaldi, he says, "I know you've known these concertos for a long time, but they're like as good as new because I've now added sonnets that like just depict everything that happens in these concertos," which is quite interesting because presumably, therefore, the concertos once upon a time existed without the text. So you would have had to have been versed in the sort of the arts of rhetoric in order to work out what Vivaldi's intentions were, what Vivaldi was getting at. For vocal music, it's much easier because you already have a text, but for instrumental music, trying to work out what's actually going on, that's more tricky. But thankfully, Vivaldi obviously saw the light and decided to write this set of sonnets to accompany the seasons. The opening of Spring, we have the famous ritornello, where basically Vivaldi says, "Spring has arrived." Then we have the bird song. Rather unusually for a group of concertos for solo violin, he starts the first solo with two extra solo violins, so it's like a trio for unaccompanied violins. And rather humorously, Vivaldi, in addition to the sonnet, he also writes little captions occasionally. And so in the first violin part, he says "Canto degli uccelli," Song of the Birds. When the second violin, he writes "Canto degli uccelli," Song of the Birds. But for the third violin part, he writes "Canto degli augelli," which is rather sort of quaint because an augello is a larger bird than the uccelli, who are the little birds. So you've got two little birds and one big bird, all right? You then have the strings come back in, and then you have the murmuring of the brook, and then all hell breaks loose when we get our sort of first thunderstorm of the year, complete with lightning flashes. I mean, sort of almost can sort of visualize it in that kind of violin writing. And then after you have the thunder and lightning, when that's all quietened down a bit, you get the birds come back again, though. Oh yeah, the big bird comes in a bit later. The slow movement is quite interesting in that you have this murmuring, the murmuring fronds and plants depicted in the two orchestral violin parts. The viola part represents a barking dog, and on the top, the solo violin is a sleeping goat herd. Now, rather interestingly, Vivaldi sets this movement in the key of C sharp minor. That's about as adventurous a key as Vivaldi ever gets. And in fact, I mean, there are certainly all sort of 5,329 violin concertos that survived by Vivaldi. Incidentally, if you don't know about Vivaldi, he didn't write that as a joke. He wrote a lot of violin concertos. There are no violin concertos in C sharp minor. C sharp minor is obviously the relative minor of E major, but because you get a lot of awkward sharps and things like that in it, it makes it difficult to use that key with the kind of temperaments that Vivaldi was using. If you discount the tiny little slow movement from RV 267, which is just a handful of bars, which is in C sharp minor, and the slow movement of the Christmas concerto, which has no solo in it, it's just long chords that sort of depicts the mysteries of Christmas. There's nothing else in Vivaldi's E major concerto like this in C sharp minor. It's a very rare key for him to choose. Possibly the reason why he chose it is actually, I mean, people often think of the dog as being rather violent. And although Vivaldi does say "suonare sempre molto forte strappato," the goat herd's still got to be sleeping. Now, if he's got a dog going for it in his ear, he probably won't be asleep. But the dog is actually, in Vivaldi's time, the dog is a representative of melancholy. He was one of the attributes of melancholy. So that, for me, is why Vivaldi chooses this very remote key of C sharp minor. The last movement, there's not really a huge amount to say. It's quite interesting. I mean, the first movement is so packed full of information. Last movement, he goes, right, it's a pastoral dance. So there's not a lot. There's sort of bagpipes and sort of all sorts of rustic instruments. You can see the drones and the viola and the bass. But what is quite interesting is suddenly, towards the end of the concerto, you get a sudden change of key where he goes straight from in the middle of the bar, straight from E major into E minor. Now, this is an example of the rhetorical device of pathopoeia, which was used by composers to sort of instill a sort of chilling effect in the listener, sort of almost, he wanted the listener to be almost fearful. You wonder what Vivaldi might have been getting at there. Of course, he does eventually get back to E major for the final ritornello, and then summer. But more about that later.